Welcome to this Baha'i Blog interview. My name is Leyla Tavernaro-Haidarian, and today I'm talking to Dr. Daniela Koppold about a recent medical study she authored about the Baha'i Fast. Daniela, you are a medical doctor in Germany, but your understanding of healing is very broad and holistic and includes natural approaches. Was this something you grew up with yourself, or how did you develop this affinity to both approaches?
Actually, I do have a legacy of this. My grandfather and also my father and uncles are medical doctors. And actually, I very much love the approach that my father has, who is really a person that is very, very loving to the patients and also has approaches of homeopathy, acupuncture, and herbal medicine in his view, and he chooses from the things that he finds necessary for the patient, from all the different disciplines of medicine or complementary or integrative medicine. So I grew up with that, and I found it so logical to really try to have everything at hand that's possible, from very mild kind of therapies to the most modern chemotherapeutic things, to be able to choose from a broad kind of spectrum what is best at the moment. And I find this is actually what I also believe in, is kind of a consultative process where different disciplines in medicine and traditions and ancient knowledge and modern knowledge can be in a discourse and find out what is best for a person. I think that is probably more the future than just one line of action. And what inspires me very much is that Abdu'l-Baha says that medicine in future will be based on nutrition and on what we eat. And actually, this is also something that that motivates me very much in my everyday research work and has a lot to do with the subject of fasting too.
So this is perhaps how you came to decide that you wanted to study or dedicate an entire study on the Baha'i Fast. Is that what led you to deciding that this is an interesting topic for you to find a team and research this? Or how did it come about?
Actually, it was a very common thing that we experience, all of us, I think, that do the Baha'i Fast, that led me to do it. The questions of other people that was saying, so can this be healthy, not to drink over the whole day? And my father very much encouraged me to look into this, and he said there must be something that you can do to find out whether the kidney parameters, for example, whether they're stable or not, to see if that is safe, because we believe that Baha'u'llah would give us something that is safe to practice. And of course, we should be able to also see this in a scientific kind of way. And actually, maybe it's very interesting to hear how prayers can also be answered. Actually, after doing the study, I heard that my grandfather was very much indeed believing that in future medicine will show that this kind of fasting is good for our health. And I didn't know, and he actually said he would pray for that and believed it very, very strongly. So I'm very happy to have been able to fulfill this, at least the very first, very little step towards that. We must say it was a pilot study, it was a small study. It's just the very beginning of kind of looking into that. But it has been rewarding, and I have had so much support of a wonderful team, I must say. Really, it couldn't have been better, really.
Beautiful. In layman's terms, what does your study look at, and how are you looking at it?
It is a pilot study, or an experimental, actually, study, because we didn't really know what effects there are. We know things from Ramadan fasting. There's a lot on Ramadan fast, and this is what I did my PhD on. But we didn't have a study on Baha'i fasting to rely on. And we thought that probably there will be points that are different in Baha'i fasting from Ramadan fasting, because, for example, the daily fasting period is shorter, at least shorter than summer Ramadan fasting. It is also in a mild climate every year. Ramadan fasting can be in midsummer, and then of course fluid parameters are different. Then there's different cultures where Ramadan fasting is practiced traditionally, and there is traditional food that is prepared in certain cultures, which can be good for your health or not. The traditions differ a lot, so there were parameters that we thought probably that we would have different outcomes from what we were looking at the Baha'i fast. Comparing to Ramadan. So we thought that we would try to get a spectrum of things, beginning from lab parameters, looking at blood glucose and cholesterol, for example. And we wanted definitely to look at the fluid balance, whether there is a dehydration during the day or during the fast. We also took anthropometric parameters, for example, body mass index, or we also had a bioimpedance analysis, which is kind of a measurement where we can look at the content the body has in fat and muscle mass. We also looked at some basic metabolism of the body, whether the changes of the body, whether the changes throughout the fast, as it does in diets, for example. And how the skeletal muscle and the fat, the fatty tissue, or the adipose tissue, as we call it, will respond to this kind of fast. Wow. Then we also look at chronobiological measurements, looking at whether our internal clock, the timing of our cells, changes through the setting of the fast, including the different timing of the meals, for example, that we experience. We had a whole set of questionnaires looking at well-being, at mindfulness and self-efficacy, for example, to just name a few. And we also had interviews with people to qualitatively have a look at what do they experience, what is their main focus in the fast, what do they see, which habits do they change, what exactly is it that they love about the fast or that they find challenging. Because questionnaires are always set, and often maybe we don't even ask about the things that are relevant to people who experience this certain intervention. So that's why we also wanted to ask friends how they live through the fast. And all these things are quite a bunch of different aspects. And one last thing, maybe we also had some religious psychologist, a religious psychologist joining the team, and she asked about mystic experiences and also looked at this kind of psychological, religiously psychological aspect of the fast. So yeah, there was different disciplines involved in the whole of this.
Wow, so it was both physiological and psychological that you were looking at, and yeah, mixed methodologies as well. So quantitative, exactly, qualitative. What were your main conclusions and findings? What stood out? Is the Baha'i fast good for you?
To say it in a nutshell, we saw that for our participants, the Baha'i fast was safe, especially if we look at the hydration parameters. That was what interested us most. And from the other things that we saw, it can be health enhancing, yes. And also a help to change habits and approaches.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that this would be the beginning, hopefully, of many more studies. What would you focus on going forward? If you were to say, let's do some more studies on this, is there something specific you would want to expand on? What would be some follow-up studies that you would think about?
Thank you for that question. That's a beautiful question. I really hope that we can do more studies on the subject. Personally, for me, the very interesting thing about the Baha'i fast is this dry component that we don't drink, because there is a lot of clinical trials going on about intermittent fasting. It's the new hype, and everybody does studies on that. And what we saw is that obviously this dry component of the fast does something to add to the effect of intermittent fasting. And I would like to explore that more. What does it mean, and how exactly does this function?
Beautiful. You mentioned the physiological, the psychological. As Baha'is, we think of the fast primarily as a spiritual practice. Is it possible to capture perhaps the full dimensions of the fast in a scientific study?
I guess we had a good beginning with that study to really try to show the different facets it has. And we actually did see that people do think about their habits, they reflect on them, and they have more mystical experiences around the fast. So obviously there's aspects that we can also trace through scientific methods, right? And something that is very interesting, and we want to look at this also a bit more in detail in our publications, is that we saw that the people that scored high on challenges during the fast also scored high on the outcomes, on the good outcomes, which makes it quite interesting because it underpins this concept of crisis and victory, also in a very kind of scientifically visible way. I found that very interesting.
That's beautiful. You mentioned your team. Perhaps you can tell me a little bit more about how roles were broken up, how many people were involved.
As I said, we had my very dear colleague Sarah Demrich-Kaboran from the University of Münster doing the religious psychology part. Then we had a specialist, or actually a whole team of specialists on metabolic measurements in another clinic of the Charité, which is Dr. Boschmann and his team with Dr. Anja Mehler. And we had our team, the team of Professor Michalsen at the Charité University Clinic in Berlin, who is actually specializing on fasting, and we're doing a lot of fasting studies, and this was one of them, and I'm very, very happy that we were able to explore this together with a team of students mainly, who, not being Baha'is, but being very, very open actually to all the work also that was associated with that study, and did a lot of sacrifices, I must say, for this to materialize, and also analyzed a lot of the data very diligently and very intelligently, I must say. And I'm very, very happy about that support. So the interviews and all the lab measurements and so on were actually done by Caroline Klatte, who is writing her PhD on that. And she's just finishing it at the moment. The interviews were done by Raffaela Ring, who is doing a publication on them at the moment. And Julia Schwarz did a bachelor thesis on the dietary changes during the fast, which is also a very interesting topic. People really changed their diets in quite a lot of cases. Yeah. So and there's one more person that is doing the analysis of the questionnaires, because we did another study in 2019 with questionnaires only, to just look again at some of the aspects that we wanted to focus on more.
Wow.
That's Felicia Klemmeyer.
Well, there's so many different people, and they all had various different roles and also various different expertise, but it all came together to produce this one very beautiful and multifaceted study, which is really wonderful.
Yeah. And I need also to mention my colleague Nico Steckhahn. He's an expert on statistics and biomedicine, and he did a lot of the statistics and the analysis. And we're planning a new study together next year. I hope we'll be able to do that. The chronobiological measurements were done by the department of Achim Kramer, who's a professor at Charité University of Berlin, and he is a specialist on the chronobiological measurements, and he has found out a new way of timing finding out the timing of cells, and we used that in this study for one of the first times in the experimental history. So that was also very interesting to see, and we had interesting results of that too.
Was there anything about concentration? My concentration levels when you're working or doing something, because I find, or this is something I think very personally I experience, is that when I'm fasting, I find myself to be more concentrated on my work, even though people around me, if I've been, in an office setting, for example, would think that I wouldn't be concentrating because I'm thinking of food, and it's not quite true for me. I think I'm more focused. Was there any aspect of the study that looked at that?
That's a very good question. Actually, we would like to do such a thing, but we didn't. That's the assessment of it is a bit more difficult. Probably we would need to use some digital kind of applications or wearables to assess concentration and alertness.
Yeah, it's definitely like a personal feeling I have because I'm not as distracted. I know from the very beginning of the day that food, drinks, coffee is just not going to be a thing. So, I'm very, very, dedicated to whatever to-do list I have. It's quite interesting.
We know from other fasting studies that this is an effect of fasting. And it can be different with different people. Depends on the metabolism, on the kind of constitution you have. But there is definitely an aspect of fasting that does this because digestion needs time and energy. And we do underestimate that usually. But we see it in fasting that this energy that the gut needs is a lot. So after lunch, often we have this kind of sleepiness, and in fasting we don't. And there we see that how much there is a change from the meal in our alertness and concentration, right? So.
Well, another observation that came to mind is that when I have a small breakfast, something that's not heavy, but not too little. It's just right. It's a little bit of oatmeal or a little bit of dark bread with some cheese on it, a little bit of something to drink, a tea. Then I can go through my day with a lot of energy and focus, and I'm well. But if I eat too much or too little, then I have hunger pangs, or I'm not as focused. So I think this sort of moderation, this idea of moderation comes in even during the fast. Also, when I'm breaking the fast, it's good for me to break it with a little bit of soup and tea and to take it easy and not to go overboard when it's time to break the fast. And that way I can maintain for 19 days a very healthy rhythm. I think we get out of that when we overdo it in the morning and in the evening as well. My personal.
Yeah, it's a very interesting observation. Actually, I've seen also during the study, people were telling me that they don't eat breakfast at all and they feel best without any breakfast. And there's people who tried that and said, no way. So this seems to be different also with different people, but it's obviously good to experiment with it because everybody is different. And also certain meals during the breakfast especially can make it much harder, because if you have a big breakfast, especially with a lot of carbs, then insulin goes up and hunger comes after 2, 3, or 4 hours, and then it's much harder to get through the day. That doesn't make much sense. So it's better to have something, as you said, grains with like complex carbs and fibers, fats, nuts, for example, and maybe a bit of protein, but that makes it easier, definitely easier to fast.
I know another topic some people are interested in is when is the best time to work out if you are a person who's quite fit and active. If it's something a lot of people sort of tend to build in towards the end of the day, just before they're going to break the fast. Some people do it before. early in the morning, some doing it in the evening. I think generally also cutting down the amount of exercise and the intensity with which you would be doing it probably. Those are also, I think, interesting aspects to be looking at.
Yeah, there's quite some Ramadan studies on sports because, of course, there's football teams and other people that's their job to do sports, and they still want to do Ramadan. So there is kind of studies on that. I wouldn't recommend to do the same amount of exercise as you do usually, but some people do, and it's not a problem for them. If you're really trained, then it's probably not a problem. It's just 12 hours without food and drink. It's okay. So if you don't overexert and lose a lot of fluids, it's not a problem actually. But if you're not trained well, then you should be more careful, of course, right? And we know that people that have that work heavily should fast. They're exempt anyhow. So that's also an aspect to consider on that. But if you're asking about the perfect time to exercise, then this is probably just before breaking the fast. If you want to increase the health effect of the exercise, then that's the best time. Because one of the health effects of fasting is that we activate our autophagy, which is the cell cleaning, self-cleaning of the cell, or the recycling process, and that ketone bodies rise. And we know that both things, and especially the rise in ketone bodies, is enhanced by sports. So you have double effect if you combine these two.
Right. Fascinating. It's good. Good to know. Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, Daniela?
I think, well, we saw that the kidney values were stable during the whole fast. And this is something that really helps us understand that, at least in the cohort that we saw, fasting is safe for healthy people, right? So this is one of the main aspects that I really, I'm very happy that we could trace that and see that very clearly. There were a few people that had a few signs of mild dehydration, and we're looking at their drinking profiles at the moment. So probably it's good to also take a bit care of how much we drink. But as I said, there might also be a positive aspect of this light dehydration. But at the moment, I can't say anything more about that. We don't know. And what I actually want to share most of all is that we really saw that fasting can be a help to start reflecting on oneself, to start changing habits, and an enhancer of our self-efficacy and our mindfulness. Mindfulness was higher than before fasting, even 3 months after fasting, which is a long period of time for a 19-day intervention to have shown effects for such a long time. So I think this is a chance for us. And I would wish us all to be able to, every year, use this chance to help us grow and change more towards the kind of person we are supposed to be.
Yeah, what a bounty that we get to have this opportunity at the beginning of every year. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Maybe one more thing. For me, it would be very interesting to read comments on this video. What exactly would be interesting for the friends to look at in another future study, if there can be any? Of course, we need funding for that, and I don't know where we can get it. This study was funded by the Baha'i Foundation for like the Foundation for Baha'i Studies, the German one, and I'm very thankful for that. But of course, these studies, clinical studies, cost a lot, so I don't know whether we can do a next one, but I hope so. And if we can, I would be super interested to know what the friends think, what they would be interested in, and if they can just comment, I can go through that, and that would be an inspiration. I would be very thankful.
Lovely. I'm sure we'll have some really, really valuable and engaging input. Thank you so much, Daniela Koppold. Thank you.
Thank you.